My name is Pavel Büchler. I'm an artist, and I'm taking part in this marvelous exhibition at the Sainsbury Centre in Norwich. So here behind me are three of my canvases, which are a kind of excuse for going to the studio every day and having something to do. For many years, I have been trying to somehow rescue, let's say, or give another chance to failed paintings by other artists. In this particular series, I have used paintings by three artists whose work I rather respect, and canvases that they themselves considered to be complete failures. Technically, what I do with the canvases is that I scrape all the paint off, grind it to dust, and then reapply it to the canvas as uniformly as I can. And the idea there is not so much to make the failed painting ultimately succeed as painting, but perhaps to kind of succeed as a better failure or fail again in a kind of better way. Yeah, the process of making the paintings on my part is rather labor intensive. The way I describe them is that, the paintings are still what they once were. Nothing is missing from them, nothing has been added except for my labor and my time. And I think that's why at Krčma thought that they would sit kind of well in this section of the exhibition, which deals with the idea of work and the purpose of the work, or purpose of working, of labor, as it has kind of shifted since the Middle Ages to the present day. And I think it asks some very pertinent questions of us today, because as we all know from Karl Marx and others, we live in a kind of environment of alienation, of alienated labor, where the purpose of labor in itself is very hard to somehow kind of think of even, or experience. And so, the kind of attempt to invest labor, my labor, in something that by definition is completely useless, is something that sort of perhaps resonates with some of the themes sort of around here. And for me, it certainly is the most interesting question that I can pose as an artist. What is the kind of nature of the artistic, of the creative labor, when the labor is actually not creating anything? Of course, in some sense, today, the work of artists, or the labor that is invested in the production of work, is no different from the type of work which is characteristic, or which typifies great many other occupations and ways of making a living, at least to the extent that it makes you a living, if it does. Where the difference lies is the commitment to the uselessness of it. That is not to say that art cannot inform, or that it cannot affect, perhaps, political decision-making and thinking and so on, as many artists actually believe it does. But it is not the primary purpose of the labor. If you want to, change the world through revolutionary means, there are better tools than the brush and the palette, I tell you that. Well, I think that if for the Middle Ages, or for the monastic concept, labor had a kind of fundamental ethical dimension, or the necessity of labor had a fundamental ethical dimension. Today, that kind of idea that work in itself is something kind of noble, that gives us kind of, a place among others in our society or in our communities that somehow has a kind of strong moral foundation is a difficult idea to kind of entertain today. And that's because I think what we mean by labor is really to a very great extent determined by professionalism. And once you kind of become identified, what does professionalism mean in this sense? It means that you are identified with one type of activity. And once you become identified with that type of activity, there is a presumption that the ethical foundation of that has something to do with the society's needs. And so it is hard to kind of sustain that kind of idea of the ethical foundation to work, because I think the way I understand it is certainly for the monks and for the monastic life, all that had to do with salvation and you work for the salvation of the soul. And that's just one thing. There isn't a question of the society's need for your work. And I think that's a very different thing today. About these two other works in the exhibition, they come from a very different moment in my life than these paintings behind me. And in some kind of way, they sit rather uneasily next to them. They are little language games, perhaps, which I sort of performed when I used to teach at Glasgow School of Art and was kind of living under this avalanche of regulations and all sorts of bureaucratic kind of insanity. And they were my way of coming to terms with it or dealing with it, or perhaps kind of satirizing it somehow, poking fun at it. And to some extent also to kind of remind the viewer or the recipient of the work of a kind of broader context, wider context of the bureaucracy and managerialism in which we all kind of have to live and function. Maybe they fit quite well, because, again, as I understand it from the exhibition, one of the kind of interesting things about the regulations that governed the monastic life were the ways in which the monks kind of found little kind of gaps and little kind of ways through them and around them to bypass them. So, for instance, I only know this from the book, but apparently, despite manual work being at the kind of heart of the monastic life alongside the prayer, or maybe second only to the prayer, in fact, quite early on, by some kind of 14th or 15th century, the monks simply hired servants who did the work for them and became managers and bureaucrats rather than the laborers. So, in some way, this is a sort of similar thing. There is something subversive, if I, in my sort of working time in my office, in the Macintosh building at Glasgow School of Art, sit and kind of try to work out how to kind of, find something kind of bizarre and crazy in the disciplinary rules and procedures of the institution. If I were to add to the list of life's greatest questions that you already have, my addition would be, like I said, what is the work of artists? What kind of work do artists do? Now, that may not seem to be one of the great questions that the humanity troubles its collective mind with. But I think it is possibly the most important question for those who feel that art has some kind of a serious and irreplaceable presence in their lives.